Hello and welcome to Wisdom of a Lifetime. And today I have a really exciting episode called We've Been Programmed. And that programming has a massive impact to our lives. So before we start, I'd love for you to go to wisdomofalifetime.com and or subscribe to my social media channels. So let's get started. So what do I mean by we've been programmed? Now, if you think about it, when we come to this planet and we're born, we have no concept of anything. We come in completely clean and fresh. We don't understand objects, languages, people, nothing. We just have a natural instinct to understand when we're hungry and we cry for that. And everything else then builds upon. So before we go further into this, let's just understand how newborns from AI really gets their environment and learn the learning characteristics. So with that, I'm going to change to ChatGPT this time instead of Gemini and ask questions. Hey, Chat, I'm on my video podcast and I'm asking the question for our listeners, how does a newborn really learn their environment when they're first coming in?
Oh, that's a really sweet question. So, for your listeners, basically, newborns start figuring out their world by using all their senses. They're like tiny explorers who rely a lot on touch, sound, and sight, even if their vision's a bit blurry at first. They learn by hearing voices, feeling cuddles, seeing faces up close, and just soaking in all that newness. So, it's all about those first gentle interactions and a lot of sensory discovery.
And so how do they further learn languages and objects and so on, and to crawl from crawling up just to crawl and then to walk? I mean, these are all learned patterns. And so how do they learn?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really like this amazing step by step unfolding. So, at first, babies are just listening and absorbing the sounds around them, especially the rhythm of the language that they hear from their parents or caregiver. And over time, they start to mimic those sounds, which is how babbling eventually turns into words. As for crawling and walking, it's all about practice and muscle development. They start by pushing themselves up, then figuring out how to coordinate their little limbs, and eventually they take those wobbly first steps. It's all just 1 milestone at a time, and a lot of encouragement along the way.
But then also, isn't from 0 to 5 or 0 to 7 their most predominant time of a newborn to then starts building their character as they learn belief systems from the environment?
Yeah, absolutely. That early window, like from birth to around age 5 or so, is kind of like prime time for shaping how kids see the world. They're not just learning words and physical skills, they're also soaking up the whole vibe of their environment, like how people interact, what's considered normal, what's safe or not safe, and all those early belief systems. So those first few years really do lay down a foundation for a kid's personality and their outlook on life. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
So there you go from AI itself. Now we come into this world not knowing nothing. We learn from our environments, mainly from our parents or our caregivers in the first early childhood, probably 0 to a year if you're going to daycare, or if you ideally have parents or grandparents take care of your caregivers, you learn and you from their caregivers and all the way to 0 to 5 has a huge impact in your psyche, your belief system. Those are very critical years. And from there, things are going to our subconscious and we're learning. Now, if you think back and you try to go back from 0 to 5, you probably won't remember a lot of things. But those were the formative years where your character gets built, your belief system gets built, and so on, as we heard from AI. But that programming from 0 to 5 impacts your life going forward unless you challenge it. For example, you will learn religion, you will learn what to say, what not to say, you will learn your belief systems about your prejudices and what you like, what you don't like. You will learn languages, you will learn so many things. And all of this now has an impact, but it doesn't stop there. It goes further as you go to school, you interact with other human beings, your friends, and they all have an impact. Now, very early on, there was a really interesting book, and I've been doing self discovery for 40 years, self development. And really, I remember reading this book from Ron Hubbard, and this is from Scientology, obviously, that later became Scientology. But I'm not going to say anything more about that. And I'm not a pro Scientologist either. I'm just talking about the book I read. And he talked about the idea of engrams, that when we get an emotional hit of a negative emotion or a positive, we'll remember those things. And that starts building on our belief systems and what our experiences are. So we have negative experiences, like let's say I go down the street and someone almost hits me with a car and I'm super scared, that I'll remember that, and so on. So those memories are then buried further deeper into our subconscious as we grow and we don't remember them anymore and we move on. But those memories, those emotions are deep in our subconscious and they're programming our neural network in our brain. So you got to think about a neural network, much like our brain is much like how AI operates. Same idea. And so we have to be very conscious now how do we unprogram that? So the first takeaway I want you to know is that we have been programmed by our environment. We don't understand what an object is, a chair, and so on. And all of those have been built upon mankind of cars, chairs, houses, all those things, those constructs are human constructs. There is nothing but human constructs in those things. And we're taught that as we're being brought up. Our society's teaching us from our upbringing, if we're born in the United States, what, Americans should be like. If we're born in Russia, what a Russian should feel like. All of those, or in other countries. So I'm not dissing any country. I'm just saying every country has their environmental society of how we're programmed, and that impacts us also. So the most important thing to take away is, how do we get past this programming? And this is really what this episode's about. And so I would love to talk more about how do we recognize and get aware that we have belief systems, both positive and negative, and these belief systems impact our future, our livelihood, our ability to be the best we can in this world. And unless we challenge it and understand that and remove that negative parts of those belief systems, we will be on a trajectory that will never be our best self. So let's go back to AI and ask questions about belief systems. So I'd like to ask more about belief systems. So as we get further in our development of our age, so let's say 5 to 10 to 15, we interact with society, schools, into our country, into how we're programmed. How does our belief systems now impact our lives through all that programming?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it kind of digs into how we evolve as we grow up. So as kids move from, let's say, that early childhood stage into school age and then into their teens, they start interacting with the bigger world. They meet teachers, friends, different communities, and they get exposed to all sorts of ideas and cultural norms. All of these experiences kind of layer on top of those early foundations. They start to shape what we believe about ourselves, what we think is possible, how we fit into society, and even what values we hold. So those belief systems we pick up along the way can really guide our decisions, our confidence, and how we navigate life. It's kind of like each experience adds another piece to the puzzle of who we become.
So what do we do about this? How do we get to this? So from my experiences, I had many, many experiences that were negative. And I'll give you an example. You can see all my musical equipment. I remember when I was young, when I first picked up a guitar, for whatever reason, I was 13, I think. And I remember getting the guitar and I was delivering papers. That days, you would deliver papers on a wagon. It was winter. I lived in Montreal. I'd go out in the morning, deliver papers every morning, and collect my money, save my money to buy an amp and guitar. And I was very proud because I really wanted to play guitar. And I remember picking up the guitar and I couldn't play anything. And so I had a teacher that would teach me little things. I remember trying to play this song over and over, try to get it right. And I called my brothers and sisters in. I said, hey, come on in. Look, I think I can play it. And I played it. And obviously I didn't play it very good. And they laughed. Now that had a major impact on me because I always thought, oh, I'm not very good. Now this is talking about 40 years ago, that impacted my ability to feel confident playing guitar. And if I don't challenge that and don't bring that out to the surface and remove that negative behavior and that never negative belief system, that's where I'm going to feel like every time I play guitar, I'm not good enough. Do you see what I'm saying? So I gave you an experience. So how do we first understand this? Well, number one, Ron Hubbard had a very good idea, was that you basically would pick different topics and you would just try to remember something from your past that's very deep, like up an episode of relationships or anything that you want to pick of, or financial, money, what how you relate to money, or how you relate to health, you know, and you try to go back as far as possible and you pick up a thought pattern that you remember and you say, okay, what happened there? And you remember that. And by remembering that, that brings it to your awareness. Okay. And you try to find these negative patterns of your belief systems. Now, the most interesting thing is you use this idea of neuro linguistic programming to remove it. And we'll talk about a little bit through AI what NLP is, neuro linguistic programming. And by removing these negative emotions that are deeply entrenched in your psyche and your subconscious, you slowly remove all that negative programming. So let's talk about and ask AI more about this. So NLP was invented a while ago, and it was used predominantly to remove negative belief systems, thought patterns from our psyche subconscious. Can you talk about more about NLP?
Absolutely. So, NLP, or neuro linguistic programming, is basically this approach that was developed back in the 1970s. It's all about understanding the connection between neurological processes, language, and behavioral patterns that we've learned over time. One of the big ideas behind NLP is that by changing how we use language and how we frame our thoughts, we can actually shift those deeply ingrained belief systems or negative patterns. It's kind of like reprogramming a bit of your own mental software. So, people use NLP techniques for personal development, overcoming fears, building confidence, and just generally getting rid of those limiting beliefs that might hold them back. It's a pretty interesting and flexible toolkit.
Thank you. So, so, so why did I bring this up? Because one of the key concepts that I learned a long time ago about removing negative patterns is basically the idea that you go in and you reprogram the one negative thought that you brought to your conscious that has caused you some changes, some challenges. And the way you do that is you neutralize the charge. Because what Ron Hubbard said back, in his book, I can't remember the name of the book, but I read it in the 80s. It was very fascinating that by neutralizing the charge, you can get rid of that negativity pattern that is constantly running in your brain. And we'll ask AI how that works in a few minutes. And you do this in a very specific technique. And I've been practicing for decades on this technique. First, running through things that I felt negative, and then removing the charge and making a sleep neutral. And sometimes you can actually make it funny. So you can actually remember the moments, add in all these kind of different ways, which I'll talk about, and it literally becomes almost funny and not even negative anymore. So how do we do that? So let's get into that. So let's say you take, for example, my idea that my siblings were laughing at me when I was playing guitar. So what I do is I remember this, and what I do is I go back and I listen and I go back to the feeling of that negativity, how I felt. And I felt that I was never not good enough, that I was laughed at, that I was feeling full of shame. And I feel that. And I remember and replay that over and over in my brain. I feel it. And that negative energy doesn't feel good. But then what I do is during that replay, I put in a dot, a little gold dot. I close my eyes when I'm replaying it. I put a gold dot into that projection. And then I blow up the gold dot into something which I feel really beautiful and happy with. Like, for example, on the beach or on the sun or hugging my children or anything that I feel joyful of. And now all of a sudden, I've just injected a really pleasant thought memory with a really negative memory. And that starts neutralizing the negative memory, in this case, playing guitar, into something that I don't feel so negative about anymore. And I start feeling good about myself, and that memory starts getting a neutral charge. So that's how you do it. And now, obviously, it takes a lot to go through this, to go under to your subconscious, figure out all the things, your belief systems. But if you don't do this, you're going to keep doing things that you don't understand from. You don't understand why you do the things you do because your belief system, when you're programmed from a very young child, or the experiences that you had, even when you're adult, they all have an impact of your belief systems and your ability to become your best. And so, really, this is really important exercise. So, I'd like for you to think about this, consider this, and really try this technique. And again, it's really simple. Pick a negative belief. It could be a belief system, money is bad, for example. Go back to money is bad. Okay. Find where did you learn money was bad? Money is just money. It's neutral. It has no concept. But many people think money is bad. So you go back to it, you try to find where money is bad. Where were these experiences that you found money bad? Maybe you grew up in a household that people were struggling and it was always arguments about money. So you found money was bad. So you go back to that and you start neutralizing those memories with positive, joyful experiences, as I talked about. And NLP teaches you this idea of placing a dot and blowing it up. You could also visualize it on a screen. You could also take that same experience and run it backwards. And then you can put some funny things in, like suddenly a clown shows up, and it becomes funny. Or so you can put like weird things that just change the whole neural patterns of that memory. So I'll end this with having AI explain how this works. So I talked about how in a memory that's stored in our brain, we remember through a neural network of patterns that memory. But we can also, if it's a negative memory, we can also take a positive memory and inject it with that negative memory and taught by NLP and make that memory that's negative kind of neutral. Is that true?
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to explain it. In NLP, there's that idea that you can sort of reframe or rewire the emotional charge of a memory. So if there's a negative memory that's going to stuck with you, you can actually overlay it with a more positive or neutral experience. And over time, that can help take away a lot of the emotional sting or the intensity of that negative memory. So yeah, in a sense, you're kind of neutralizing it by blending in a more positive or empowering perspective. It's a pretty neat technique that a lot of people find really helpful.
So there you go. I hope this helped. And really, it's really important for you to do these exercises. If you want to change your life, there's no matter how much intentions you do, how much you do in other aspects of actually working your life and going and hard to go take the actions of your intentions. These belief systems are core fundamentally that if you don't change, will have a continuous impact of your life, no matter how many intentions or actions you take. These belief systems are very deep inside and they have to be brought out to the awareness, the light shining on it, remove that negative thought patterns and energy so that you can then be your best self in life and start living a life that is truly yours and in your purpose. So with that, I want to thank you for this episode and I look forward to seeing you next time. And please subscribe or like this episode and take care.